All right, we're going to rip through these last two series pretty quickly. I do find them interesting, just less interesting than the first two. So let's start with Philly-Miami. Obviously, the Embiid thing makes it super complicated. That was a really strange report yesterday. Like, you could interpret that as Embiid's going to sit out the rest of the playoffs. You could also interpret it as he just has a concussion and he could be back by Monday, right? So we don't know what to say. So for the sake of, here's the thing. If Embiid's out, Miami's winning the series. So we don't even have to get into that if Embiid's going to miss the playoffs. But let's quickly break down what the series would look like if Embiid did play, because that would be the only scenario in which this series would be worth watching and worth breaking down. So let's start with Miami on offense. Specifically, what worries me with this situation is Embiid's ability to hang out around the rim. Toronto did a really nice job with their 5-out kind of drive and kick attack of making Embiid cover a lot of ground on the perimeter. But Bam Adebayo, in the way that he's utilized in their system, hangs out a lot around the high post, kind of like Jokic does a lot of dribble handoffs and ball screens. But he can't shoot. That is going to lead to a dynamic where Joel Embiid can camp around the basket. That will be the biggest indicator of this series in Miami's ability to score. Can they force Joel Embiid to cover ground on the perimeter? So much of that will have to do with, will Philly's guards and wings do a good job of chasing guys over the top of all their dribble handoff actions? Because if they struggle, if Bam Adebayo gets Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro and all these guys, and Gabe Vincent and Max Strus wide open looks flying off of these dribble handoffs, then Embiid has to come out to show on the dribble handoffs. If Embiid has to come out and show on the dribble handoffs, now Joel Embiid is further away from the basket, which opens up opportunities for everybody to get to the rim for Miami. So a huge part of this specific matchup is going to be how successful is Philly at keeping Embiid around the rim. Couple other things. Jimmy Butler's health. We had knee issues. He missed Game 5 of the Atlanta Hawks series. How available is he going to be? How successful is he going to be? That's going to be the interesting wrinkle. Miami's best chance to win this series is if Jimmy Butler is healthy and like capable of doing the same types of things that he did in the bubble playoff run when he was so dominant. Then lastly, with Miami on offense, how successful will they be attacking James Harden and Tyrese Maxey? Philly has great defensive players on a lot of spots on the floor. Joel Embiid's great defensive player. Tobias Harris is very good. Matisse Thybulle is very good, although he has offensive issues that lead him to having trouble playing. Danny Green is a pretty dependable defensive player in the playoffs. But Tyrese Maxey and James Harden, they struggle specifically with... Tyrese Maxey kind of reminds me of a lot of young defensive guards. Like, there are possessions where he looks great, but then there are possessions where he gets lost. It's kind of part of the deal with being young. And then James Harden just doesn't care enough to put in the work, and he's not mobile enough to contain people on the perimeter. He only does well defending post mismatches. So how successful will Miami be attacking James Harden and Tyrese Maxey will go a long way towards Miami's ability to score. Philly on offense. There are two things specifically that I wanted to look at here. Can Bam Adebayo cover Joel Embiid in single coverage? Because if he can, it diminishes the shot quality for everybody else on Philly and makes the entire game significantly harder. James Harden has less room to operate. Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey don't get as many of the wide open opportunities that they get to build their confidence and build their rhythm, give them the ability to go off in more contested situations. So Bam's ability to guard Embiid, huge swing factor for the series. You'll know pretty quickly in game one if he's up to that challenge. And then last, and this is the biggest reason, I'm picking Philly to win the series in 6, by the way, if Joel Embiid is healthy. And the biggest reason why I'm going that way is there's one area in that first round that I vastly underestimated. We talked a lot about this in the show that we did the other day on Thursday night, when we were talking about the difference between shooters and makers and how confident guys like Tobias Harris and Danny Green and Tyrese Maxey are when they get open looks, because they are makers, not shooters. They're very, very good shooters that are confident in their shot. Well, I think I've resoundingly underestimated how much shooting Philly has. And a huge part of what made that Toronto series as dominant of a performance as it was for Philly was all this attention devoted to Embiid. The ball would just get swinging around. Even if Embiid blew the first, double team read, it would be swing, and there would be somebody with some type of advantage. And Danny Green and Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey are just gonna knock down these shots. They were 11 for 23 in Game 6 up in Toronto. That amount of shooting, I think, is going to make Miami pay. Miami, by the way, just like Milwaukee, is another team that gives up a ton of open threes. Now, they actually lead the league in the half court in three-point Milwaukee overall gave up the most threes, but Miami in the half court gave up, according to Cleaning the Glass, gave up the most 3-point attempts, but they also gave up the worst 3-point percentage. So Spoelstra is very smart about leaving guys open, but leaving the right guys open. But the trick is, like I just said, I'm not sure Philly has a right guy to leave open except for Matisse Thybulle, right? When they're with their best lineups and you have James Harden and Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris and Danny Green, there's just not a good guy to leave open there. So if Miami's going to give up a ton of open threes and a ton of help on defense, that specific team is equipped to make them pay. I think this is going to be a series that gets ugly and is pretty low scoring. I think both teams are going to struggle to some extent scoring in the half court. But I think I think Philly's Embiid advantage, meaning they have the best opportunity to compromise the defense consistently by forcing double teams, in conjunction with their overall shooting and the fact that Miami's defense is set up to give up 3-point shots. I think that gives Philly the advantage in this series, and I'm picking them to win in 6, possibly a little bit earlier. It's just the home court advantage thing that throws it off for me. Going with Philly in 6. Really quickly, let's talk about Dallas and Phoenix. Another series where we can't take too much away from the regular season. Luka only played in 1 game against Phoenix. It was at home. Phoenix dominated in 1. They were Dallas actually led the first 3 quarters, and the Phoenix was unbelievably dominant in the fourth quarter. They won the fourth quarter 35-19. We'll get into that in just a second. In that game, Luka was 9 for 23, 2 for 9 from 3, 8 assists with 8 turnovers, and was a -7. Disastrous fourth quarter. We saw some issues with Dallas's fourth quarter offense against Utah. It does become predictable, but part of the issue there was Rudy Gobert is very, very difficult to score against. And for all the things we said about Utah's defense, they did lock in and get a lot of stops in crunch time. They just got themselves killed throughout the rest of the game. Will DeAndre Ayton provide the same type of deterrence as Gobert? We're going to see. We're going to see if he can guard Luka out on the perimeter. Another big thing is going to be how willing is Phoenix to give up switches with Chris Paul and Devin Booker onto Luka, because Luka has always had a ton of success against smaller players because of his ability to use his body to shield guys away from contact. So to make a long story short, I expect Luka and Dallas to have a good amount of success against Phoenix's defense. Luka's too smart, and there are matchups to attack. Phoenix does run a pretty traditional defensive scheme. Luka, I think, is going to feast on that in a lot of settings. So much of it is going to come down to how often can he get Chris Paul and Devin Booker in single coverage. Moving on to Phoenix on offense. This is where Chris Paul becomes so devastating. We talked a lot about how Dallas's defense is excellent. They make up for a lack of defensive personnel with absurd effort and an excellent scheme. But there's a good amount of gimmickiness to that, right? There are a lot of options on the floor to attack. Chris Paul is going to find a way to put Dallas in some predicaments defensively. They're going to want to switch a lot of the screen and roll actions, but again, do you like Maxey and Kleba in a matchup against Chris Paul in isolation on the perimeter? Do you like Chris Paul in isolation again, or do you like Luka Doncic in isolation against Chris Paul on the perimeter? Like, I don't think Phoenix is going to have any issues scoring. And then a huge issue, especially when we're talking about switching, against Utah, Dallas could get away with switching smaller defenders onto Gobert because Gobert is like one of the worst matchup attacking bigs in the entire league. We've talked a lot about it this season. I think he only had 10 made field goals in the entire regular season against switches. It might even have been worse than that. I can't remember. I just vaguely remember seeing that stat somewhere on Twitter. But DeAndre Ayton, significantly better, kind of a monster attacking switches when Chris Paul pulls the big away and the guard gets switched onto Ayton. Chris Paul is relentless on hitting Ayton, and Ayton just goes to that quick little, a half hook that he hits in the lane, and he hits it all the time. He's got one of the best hook shots in all of basketball right now. So that's going to put them in a bunch of predicaments. And then lastly, Dallas really struggled guarding Bojan Bogdanovic. We talked a lot about this on the show. That big rim pressuring wing, especially against switching defenses, can just get great looks all over the floor. Well, Devin Booker is not as big as Bojan Bogdanovic, but he is similar in the way that he can attack shorter mismatches. There will be spots on the guys on the floor for Dallas, like guys like Reggie Bullock, guys like Jalen Brunson. There are going to be a lot of guys. Spencer Dinwiddie's another one. There are going to be a lot of guys out there that Devin Booker is going to feel comfortable attacking in isolation, kind of similar to the way Bogdanovic did, and he's going to get a lot of good looks. This is another one where my head is telling me Phoenix is going to dominate. My head is telling me sweep or 5 games that Phoenix is going to win, but I have too much respect for Luka. I think he's a top-tier superstar. I just have a feeling he's going to find a way to drag this series out, so I'm going Phoenix in 6.